Hey everybody, we're the Benchwarmers, your bi-weekly-ish look at the world of Jews and sports, the world's greatest and usually only Jews and sports podcast. I'm Jamie, here with my co-host Gabe. Gabe, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. You know, they say that 80% of success is showing up, and we're now on our 75th odd episode. So we've
Something
we've
like that.
outlasted all the other imitators, all the other haters, all the other competition.
It's definitely not 80%. 50% is showing up.
50% is showing up. Well, enough of it that
You think
we're
it's more than that?
we're still showing up. That's what we're here for
We're still
your
showing up.
audience. And we've
Yeah.
got a really interesting show for you tonight. Almost a full episode of Literary Corner. A
Yeah, I would say this is a sort
segment of the Benchwarmers.
I was thinking about this before, that our last episode we interviewed Jonah Fialco, who's a hot dog vendor at Wrigley Field. So this is sort of like a mini series on sort of different careers within the Jewish sports world that weren't necessarily front of mind, as you know, compared to like players, general managers, coaches, and stuff like that. We have a great interview. Yeah, different perspectives, different roles within the Jewish sports ecosystem. We have an interview coming up with Stacey Agdern. Stacey is a romance novelist whose specialty, whose novels really focus on Jewish athletes, Jews in sports, and specifically hockey. She has a new book, B'nai Mitzvah Mistake, coming out in just a few days. So it was really great to talk to her about her new book, Jewish sports romance writing, Jewish romance writing. All of it was very cool to get the perspective. Yeah. I'd say something neither you or I really knows a lot about, but we do this podcast not just to educate our listeners, but to educate ourselves. It was great to talk to Stacey.
Learning is a collaborative experience, and sure. Podcasting is a collaborative experience. Interviewing is a collaborative experience, and the growth that comes of that is interesting. The conversation is interesting. It ranges from basically, what it means to be proud of being Jewish, all the way to the specific contours of Adam Fox's body. We really go up and down all over the place. And it's a really fascinating conversation, and I had a blast. Stacey was lovely and a lot of fun to talk to.
Maybe our first guest who, like us, is a McGill University alum. I'm not sure if we've had anyone else on who's a McGill alum. Probably somebody we didn't talk about it with, but she's from New York. But great to find out that like many Northeasterners before her, she made the journey up to Montreal.
Many Northeastern, Westchester,
go to Canada's,
New York Jewish people. She's made their way to McGill, Canada's Harvard, Canada's Brandeis,
Canada's greatest university. We like to think of Harvard as America's McGill.
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah, that's
just
right.
FYI. Nice to meet a fellow Martlet. Do you know we're all Martlets now?
Yeah, we're all Martlets now.
We're all.
They got rid of the previously racist name. Do you? This is a side note, but do you remember there was an episode of Letterkenny where Jewish actor Jay Baruchel played a neo-Nazi who was upset they were getting rid of the racist hockey team names, and he gives a huge rant about why it's important to keep the racist name, and one of the players just goes, I think this guy's a bit of a goof, eh? And then they just move on.
Jay Baruchel is like most of the like mainstream Jewish hockey content that goes on in pop culture.
I think so.
Although I guess because he wrote and directed. He wrote Goon. He wrote and directed Goon 2, and he's in it as well. Although he doesn't play a Jewish character,
but he's a well-known,
prominently featured
Jewish Habs fan.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously cares about hockey a lot, and is pretty publicly Jewish. I don't know if there's any other like movies I can think of that feature Jewish hockey players. Obviously there's some Jews in the Mighty Ducks, but I don't know if I can think of anything else.
Is Goldberg canonically Jewish?
I think Goldberg is, and also maybe the kid with glasses. I don't recall his name. I can't recall if any of the actors per se in the Mighty Ducks series are Jewish, but gotta figure some of them are.
Bringing it up right now, I don't think anyone from the Iceland team, the evil team in D2, was potentially Jewish. Even though what was the dentist, the evil coach, even though Iceland doesn't really have a hockey team, as we all know. No. But the evil coach's name, Wolf the Dentist Stanson, with their star Gunnar Stahl. I don't think they were all particularly Jewish. Although I'm looking through now, Gordon Bombay, Emilio Estevez, not Jewish, Joshua Jackson, Charlie Conway.
Jussie Smollett, Jewish hockey player. There you go.
Which one?
He played the character named Terry Hall, Jesse's younger brother in Mighty Ducks 1, and
Wow.
is more famously known for staging a hate crime against
Yes,
himself.
I was about to say, and now it seems that Goldberg is canonically Jewish. He's played by Jewish actor Sean Weiss.
Yeah, and Aaron Schwartz, who played Dave Karp, also I think canonically Jewish. So
yes.
that's a few. Anyways, so exciting to get into some Jewish hockey talk with Stacey. Just cool to think about this from a different perspective. I mean, I don't know that I'm going to be a new romance reader per se. Like it's but it is interesting as a genre that it's so like hyper specific in terms of these genres and these subgenres and like that. Let me put it this way: it's very nice that if you are someone who wants to read romance novels exclusively about Jewish protagonists, you could read them for the rest of your life now. You could pretty much read one a day. If you're somebody who wants to read just about sports romance, like, and Stacey gets into this with us, like there is a lot of it. You can really get into it and really read a lot about it. So it's very cool. Like it's cool that all this exists. It's nice that there's been a flattening, I guess, to a certain degree of the publishing world that allows so much of this to get published and be available and get to it and get to an audience that is yearning for it.
I agree. It's I think that sports fandom, as you said, we think of as one dimensional, as well as Jewish sports fandom. You look at your team and you cheer for it. And we get into this conversation with Stacey that, romance novels aren't just bodice rippers and sex fantasies. They're, stories about things that happen in the real world and things that can happen to you, about people and characters that you might know and experiences that you might have. And that folds in very nicely with both sports fandom and Judaism in a way that we didn't fully know.
But before we get to that interview, I think we should just go over a little bit of sports news that's been going on the hockey scene. Not much to talk about in terms of the players
elimination
that are left.
I think of all Jews from the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, when we're taping this, the Hurricanes and the Stars are technically alive, but it's going to be Vegas and Florida in the finals. So not a lot of Jewish representation there. Zach Hyman, in the conference finals was I think really the last
semi-conference semifinals, as well as
the conference semifinals.
The Hughes brothers on the east side too.
Oh, that's true. I guess I thought of New Jersey as they got bounced pretty quickly, but it's true they were they were around. I guess they didn't make it, so too bad. Not a lot of Jewish rooting interest in terms of anything else in the NHL, but there's always next year. On the basketball side, I mean, as we're taping this again, the Eastern Conference isn't set yet, but the Denver Nuggets are in the finals, led by definitely not Jewish Nikola Jokic and the often mistaken for Jewish but not Jewish Kroenke family, who are the owners.
Yes.
I guess the Miami Heat have a Jewish owner. Miami's like a pretty Jewish.
They do. Mickey Arison. Israeli.
Yeah, Miami's a pretty Jewish city. I guess if you want to cheer for anything, you can cheer for the Florida teams. Like, there's probably some Jewish connection there in that, like, I don't know, lots of Jews, especially from Canada on winter vacation, like go to Heat and Panthers games, like get attached to those teams as a second team.
Oh yeah, it's a real thing.
So that's something. Unfortunately, no Jewish players still around. I did want to talk about briefly is that Israel has made it to the U20 World Cup. This isn't something we talked about before, but excuse me. Israel's currently playing the under-20 FIFA World Cup. It's their first time in the U20 World Cup, and it's their first time in a World Cup of any kind since the 1970s when Israel made it. It was a bit of a controversy. I guess we didn't cover this at the time. It must have been in between episodes, but Indonesia had been slated to host it and basically balked at hosting it due to Israel. And it was sort of quickly figured out that it would be moved to Argentina, and the rights were stripped from Indonesia.
Maybe militant is the wrong word, but FIFA was very defendant of Israel throughout this whole process.
Yeah, which is nice to see, I guess. I mean, we've talked about this before in the context of soccer, which is that I don't know, soccer has a lot of anti-Semitism problems, and
Yes, and
I don't
you
know, the
know,
idea of yes, we're going to host this international tournament unless Israel makes it, in which case we won't. Oh no, we're not concerned about any of the I don't know myriad human rights abuses, lack of democratic norms, whatever you want to call it, of many of the other countries that are participating or could be participating in this tournament. But Israel being involved, no, that's the bridge too far. So
absolutely.
yeah, I don't know
And
much about the Indonesian soccer organization, but
I can't imagine it's not corrupt, given
too bad for
what we
them.
think about soccer organizations.
Yeah.
Baseball season continues apace. We see.
Well, sorry, I was just going to say
Oh, go on.
before we get to that, I just want to say, but sorry, just as we're recording this, it's the knockout stage. Israel has one draw and one loss. They lost to Colombia, which I don't think is a surprise to anyone. I mean, it's Colombia. It's one of the better soccer programs in the world. But they did
Mm-hmm.
manage a 1-1 draw with Senegal, which is pretty impressive. Senegal's had plenty of teams in the World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
They're often in the U20, and so Israel's going to be playing its last match against Japan on May 27, which is a few days from now, as we're recording this. It would be a pretty impressive thing for Israel to beat Japan. That's pretty much what they will need to do to make it to the knockout stage. There's a way for them to play in based on their numbers to the possible knockout stage if they're not one of the top two teams in their group. But being one of the top two teams is the easiest way to get in, basically.
Yep.
So we'll see. That is definitely worth checking out this weekend. If Israel can beat Japan, that would be a huge win, and I think speak volumes about what the football program in Israel is doing and how it's building up, and hopefully, especially with an expanded World Cup field for the Senior World Cup, leading to another Israel berth, and if not in 2026, then hopefully in 2030.
I say this, as positively as I can, but I cannot imagine the geopolitical conversations that will happen if that's the case.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
I
true,
can't
but
imagine it'll go smoothly.
it's impressive to see Israel football, getting to this place on the world stage, making the U20 World Cup and hopefully having a good run through 2026 qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
Potentially you could have an Israel game in, an American city with a large Jewish population. Having an Israel game in Miami or New York or LA would be pretty amazing. So it's not off the table. It's
Absolutely.
definitely plausible.
No, it's absolutely
Yeah.
possible. And I think it'll be, it's going to be a fun qualifying cycle no matter what. We're still looking for that global Jewish soccer star, yet to be found.
Yeah.
On a massive scale. I think Mario Balotelli was the closest we got, being raised and adopted by a Jewish family.
Sure. I mean, Manor Solomon, who's playing for Fulham now,
Mm-hmm.
and who's on the Israeli national team as well. He's too old to be on the under 20 team, obviously, but had represented Israel internationally on that team before. He is contributing. He's contributing to Fulham, certainly. He's playing in the Premier League is obviously pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's
So we'll.
it's a very good point. Maybe he'll have his chance to shine in Canada in 2026.
Yeah, in Canada,
What
U.S., or in the NAFTA World Cup.
the USMCA World Cup it is now.
Uzbekistan World Cup. You're right. You're
That's
right.
right.
You're right.
We're in the post-Trump
I'm living in
era.
the '90s, man.
Yeah, you are very much so. Should we take a quick break?
NAFTA just rolled off our tongue.
Should we take a quick break before we get to our interview with Stacey?
Yeah, before we do, I want to talk a little bit about our partnership with BetStamp.
BetStamp.
The BetStamp app, which is helping thousands of people win at sports betting for free. It is the best resource for finding the best prices, the best lines out there, comparing lines, and deciding where to put your money. If you're anything like us, then
Yeah.
you have been
I wanted to ask you,
spending some fun money on gambling the last year or so,
and would you
since
say,
it's been
Jamie,
legalized in Ontario.
like, are you an optimizer? Like, do you like to optimize your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I shop around. I check prices. I like to get a good deal on whatever I can.
And this is, I guess, sounds like a platform that would allow you to do that, but with your gambling dollar.
Yeah, that's right. So, basically the way it works is you can check any bet that you would want to make and see where on the various sports books that exist within your jurisdiction. If you're in Ontario, all the ones that exist here, and see the different lines that they have. This can make a huge difference in your outcomes if you can get the best lines. All those things. On average, we're told BetStamp users win an extra $1,000 yearly just by line shopping. So it's definitely worth checking out. You can log in and sign up with the promo code Menschwarmers. BetStamp app is on the Apple iOS Store, Google Play Store, and available through your browser at betstamp.app. Check it out. We're joined tonight by Stacey Agdern, romance novelist extraordinaire. Hi, Stacey. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, James. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really looking forward to chatting tonight.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are? What do you do? What is the focus of your writing that we found so interesting?
So, my name is Stacey Agdern. I am a New Yorker. I'm a huge hockey fan, have been for a while. I am also pretty much up to my neck in the romance genre. I worked in an independent bookstore for about 10 years. And I've been a published romance writer since 2012, which is a wild thing to think about in various shapes or forms. My first solo series, the Friendships and Festival series, began in October of 2020, and my new book, The B'nai Mitzvah Mistake, comes out on June 1st, not very long from now. I write Jewish characters very proudly and very excitedly, and I also find ways to insert hockey-related things into my books all the time, because that's just what happens. If you pay attention to something enough, you get inspired by what you see and what you read in various ways, and lo and behold, that's what happens. I'm also a huge romance reader, and I've been for a while as well.
So, first question, at least that I have coming straight from this, is that as a big hockey fan, right now we're in the middle of the playoffs.
Yep.
Is there I guess we're at the end of the playoffs now. Is there any sort of major Jewish tradition or ritual where you think the Stanley Cup could take the place? I have an idea, but I'd like to hear your opinion on what the most Jewish thing one could do with the Stanley Cup.
I mean, take it to an oneg, of course, and be the center of the kiddush, on a Friday night. One of the many stories that inspired the series is actually a story I heard about. Actually, Adam Fox. We're probably going to talk more about this later, but I found out that after he won the Norris, his parents sponsored an oneg at the congregation that he went to.
Oh, wow.
Nice. That there were members of out there, and I was like, oh my god,
phenomenal story.
Yeah,
because doing the 4 full cups of wine at Passover with the Stanley Cup, I think would be a little too much. Maybe if you had the whole team doing it, but that's a bit of a big ask. Yeah,
there were.
I was gonna suggest that the same way just before they read from the Torah, the B'nai Mitzvah boy or girl parades the Torah around on their shoulder, and everyone touches it with their talis. I think that's where I would put the Stanley Cup and Jewish traditions.
That would be so
coming
much fun.
down from the bima and going up and down and through the synagogue.
Also, what about Simchat Torah?
Sure.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Bringing it around the entire synagogue and the entire town and the entire area, as everybody's dancing with the Torahs and celebrating.
But you have to have won it, right? It has to be
absolutely.
It
has to be the day with the cup.
Yeah, the day with the cup, right?
Yeah, your day with the cup, exactly.
Yep.
You just got
it's supervised. It's not as wild as 94 from the stories that I remember hearing, but it is still, and earlier clearly, but it is still a day with the cup.
Well, that's sort of tricky because you would need to have. I guess if you had an early enough Simchat Torah, it would be right during training camp, maybe before the season starts. Anyways, Stacey, congratulations on the new book coming out. I'm sure that's very exciting. Every time there's pub date and getting ready for that. So we're going to talk about the book a little bit too, but just sort of more generally, how did you get into I guess romance reading and romance writing? How did that pique your interest, or how did that come about?
So I've always written,
Okay.
always. Talking about romance writing in particular, the traditional Ador Vador story. My mother is a huge romance reader. And she gave me the book that would be my first romance that I would read, a book by Joanna Lindsay called Until Forever, which destroyed all of my preconceived notions about romance as a genre in one fell swoop. It was not a historical. It was, in fact, a science fiction adventure story with a heroine who was a strong archaeology professor, and the hero was attached to a cursed sword. And it was a great, fun, like fantasy story that I didn't expect was possible in the romance genre, and that was it. When I got into, but the road for me to get into writing hockey romance was a different story entirely, and sports romance in general. Like I started, like Rachel Gibson's See Jane Score, sort of a seminal book about a newspaper reporter and the like sort of slightly snarky goaltender that she is forced to partner with for reasons. Was the first time I'd ever read a hockey romance. Rachel Gibson wrote a long series of them, but it wasn't until Chasing Stanley that was published in 2007 by Deirdre Martin, which is slightly controversial, but we'll get into that later. Where in the story of her fictional, slightly inspired by Rangers team, the heroine was Jewish. You know, on the cover there was like a sort of a drawn Stanley Cup, and the Stanley in question was referred not only to the cup but also to the main male character's dog, who was a rather large Newfoundland, and the heroine was a dog trainer who was Jewish, who lived on Long Island. And it was the first time, like I am a second generation, third generation Ranger fan. Like there are stories of my grandfather skipping Stuyvesant High School to go and Columbia to go and see like the Rangers at the Old Garden. Like
Right.
I am that degree of like steeped in tradition Ranger fan. So like when I started writing romance, I was like, oh, I can't do this. There's no way. I'm Jewish. Like, I don't see myself. And, you know, one of the reasons why I write what I write is because, you know, you want to see yourself represented. You want to see your culture represented. And so when I read Chasing Stanley, I was like, wait a second, what? You mean people like me can show up in a hockey romance? Really?
Right. And that's interesting to see. I would say someone who, you know, doesn't typically read romance novels or have the same understanding of them as you do, that, you know, I guess my conception of them is the sort of, you know, Harlequin romance, you know, bodice rippers, period pieces and stuff like that. And, you know, in reality, there's a much deeper, you know, modern tradition, I guess, or modern romances, you know, that are sort of set in maybe not exactly the real world, but a real world, a world that could
But a
exist.
facsimile, yeah.
Yeah, you know, that could exist for someone. You know, it might have elements of that, of fantasy, I guess, to a certain degree. Like in your book, The Name It's you know, Miracle, the main character is a hockey player. I mean, that is sort of like a fantasy figure. Most of us are not you know, lucky enough to be going on dates with professional athletes or great, you know, great, but it is real. There are hockey players in this world. That's what I mean.
Yeah,
he's not a pirate. Exactly. He's not a, you know, you know, a disgraced count or something like that. So it's very cool to see. It's grounded in reality. It does feel real, and the Jewishness is really, you know, front and center. Certainly in this book.
And that's important to me. You know, the Jewishness being front and center. Like when you write something, when you write anything, whether it is a historical, a paranormal, contemporary, fantasy, it doesn't matter what it is. You have to have a reason for it, whether it's the stories that you read as a kid, you know, with your grandmother, whether it's the stories that inspired you most, whether it's based on things that you love watching with your family or your friends, you know, screaming at the television. Like eventually something's going to hit hard, and that's what's going to happen. And like, it's always going to be written through your particular lens, so to speak. Like, how do you see the thing you love? How do you want to change the thing you love? And then all of a sudden that becomes a story.
Oh, it's amazing you talk about that and change. Let's talk a little bit about in the new book about Asher. You know, specifically the Jewish hockey player who, in conjunction with the main character, is trying to sort of start a advocacy group for Jewish athletes. To make Jewish athletes sort of a more, you know, respected and outspoken group. You know, the book treats that as very sexy. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, as
And rightfully so, I
yeah,
might add.
it's important. Like there are a lot of different things that sort of brought that inspired that aspect of the book. One of which is I think the book is called Unwritten Rules, and it's written by Evan F. Moore and Jashvina Shah. And it's a really interesting sort of way to talk about hockey culture and how to change it.
Okay.
And that was I'm part of a group called the Chippy Chicks. We do a monthly YouTube show. It's me and four of the romance writers who are also huge hockey fans, and we talk hockey, romance, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we did a book discussion of that. And one of the things that I was thinking as I was reading, because of course, like over the past number of years, there have been various anti-Semitic incidents that have happened, in conjunction with hockey. There have been 5 minutes where like the NHL talked about, oh, it's great, we need to stand together and deal with anti-Semitism, but nothing happened.
Sure.
And like there has been no pushback, no nothing. And so there have also been, as you probably both have heard, so many different stories on all levels of kids dealing with anti-Semitic incidents when they play hockey. And so as I'm reading this book, I'm thinking about the ideas that are suggested sort of generally to help change internal hockey culture as a sport, because I've got most of this book pulled together, but I'm thinking about these ideas and what to do with them, and my slight frustration at like what visibility or lack thereof, when it comes to Jewish players, when it comes to support to fight against anti-Semitism beyond simply words.
Sure.
I looked at the HDA and I was like, this is what we need. As a romance writer, one of the things that I'm most proud of in the past couple of years is something called the Romance Schmooze Discord, which is an amazing collection of brilliant romance writers and readers who all of us happen to be Jewish. We're writing Jewish books, reading Jewish books, talking Jewish things. There's a whole bunch of stuff in context there, and I love this group so much. But it was something that I was missing, in the earlier part of my romance writing career.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 2 different articles. One, I think it was a profile that Zach Hyman did in The Athletic, where, he kind of sort of, there's a sentence or 2 in the profile, and I can't exactly remember, but basically like it was this sort of idea and desire for community.
Mm-hmm.
And it echoed something that Adam Fox said in an interview, I think with the JTA. Like it was literally, that sentence could be like copied and pasted.
Right.
From Fox to Hyman. And I was like, in the back of my head, thinking about the HDA, the Romance Schmooze group, and how that all got together. And I was like, that's what he wants. That's what Asher's purpose is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's this thing that I want.
In the book, I mean, he's starting sort of like an advocacy group for Jews in hockey. He talks about it's certainly something we've heard from athletes we've talked to over the years about this idea of like, coaches starting every practice with a Christian, maybe, nominally non-denominational, but actually Christian prayer.
Yep.
The idea of billeting, what it means for a Jewish athlete to be billeted. Like, so from some of our listeners don't know, like in the hockey system, in the major junior system, like players are often housed with families in the town they happen to be playing in. And it's a system called billeting. And it's like, I actually hadn't thought about it before seeing it in your book of it. Like, what does it mean if you are an observant Jew and you're billeted with some non-Jewish family that doesn't know what that means? What does that mean? Are there players who have been dissuaded from going down that route because of what that would mean, and what does that mean for their careers? That hockey is a very, very of any of the North American sports, the whitest and most
culturally Christian.
Yeah,
sure.
Culturally Christian sport. I mean, in so many ways. So it's interesting to think about these things. And at the same time, I mean, we are, as lots of people pointed out, us included, I hope, we are in sort of a golden age of Jewish hockey playing.
Very much
there's
so.
Probably as many Jews in the NHL right now as there have ever been, and Jews at the highest level. Fox, Hyman, the Hughes brothers, like and on that. It's sort of amazing to see. So it's cool to see it reflected back in the culture of what if we have a Jewish hockey playing protagonist who is a nice Jewish boy and also a prime athlete and interested in his community and all that. So really, really cool to see.
Well, something just to jump in here, something that strikes me, we've spoke to Zach Hyman, we've had him on the show before, and we'd love to talk to Adam Fox one day. But when you look at a lot of the Jewish athletes out there, they stand out as two guys who like really care.
Yeah, very much so.
And they want to create the community and they want to live Jewishly publicly. Which, and they're not shy about it, which isn't,
Which is
even
new.
amongst some Jewish athletes is totally new.
It's kind of amazing. Like, I have been slightly salivating over the Hebrew version of the Edmonton Oilers Zach Hyman jersey. But not only that, because it's number 18. Like, I lost my like I lost my shit. Excuse my language. Over
this
the
is
fact,
a swearing podcast.
Okay. Like, when I saw he was doing that, changing his number to number 18, and why, and how public he was about it, that's a frigging big deal. That's a huge. That was a huge deal for a lot of reasons, and like for Fox becoming more and more open about his Judaism, about his desire to represent the community. Like, I have an 8-year-old nephew. At the time of the book, he was 7, but like, nevertheless, when I was writing the book, he was 7, and it is nice. It is very nice that he gets to grow up now that Harrison Bader is on the Yankees and he's talking more and more about his faith. But like, it is so wonderful for him to grow up and see players on his team who worship like he does, who, who have Passover Seders, who have, experience in going to Shabbos dinner, who know what a challah is, and like, how to pronounce it too. Like, it's a gift in a lot of ways that I think, like, it's just a gift, period, end of story.
And so it seems like that sort of focus on representation, I guess we spoke to this before a little bit, it's sort of reflected in the romance community as well, because again, in my estimation of things, I would imagine that, like, once upon a time, the religion of the character wasn't mentioned. It was just sort of nominally Christian, nominally white. Like, that was the protagonist of any story, like, right? And now it is. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that, Jews aren't the only people who have reached for some specificity with this, and that
the same. Yes,
you can find that within romance. It's interesting to see how I don't want to say niche per se, but how specific the genres are within romance fiction, to get to this point where there is a whole canon of Jewish romance, a canon of sports romance stories, set in the Roman age. Very cool. Well, cool to see.
I mean, sports romance isn't new for sure.
Okay.
Like, it's kind of fundamentally been part of the genre for a long time. It depends on like one of the people that I do the Chippy Chicks with is a huge Winnipeg Jets fan. Her name is Kelly Jameson. She is like one of the OGs, we'll say, of hockey romance. Like, she's been writing hockey romance for a long time for many publishers that no longer exist. And she's again, like, you go back to like Rachel Gibson writing for HarperCollins Avon, and Deirdre Martin published by Berkeley, the Penguin Group.
Okay.
Like, it goes even further back than that, but specifically, but like, in terms of conversations about diversity and inclusivity, like, it's the same conversation that happens in sports, that happens everywhere. Like, all the things that I love are having these conversations. You think about Renee Hess and Black Girl Hockey Club, and the same conversations are happening in romance. I mean, my first thought is the amazing Quanah Jackson, whose We Need Diverse Romance campaign started, I want to say, like, right around the time where, I think it was 2015. I don't remember. But the point is that, like, everything echoes in that same way, in that same conversation, which is why it was so easy for me to think about, like, community and what that would look like in hockey, because all of the same conversations are happening in the same ways.
Right.
Whether it's in hockey, whether it's in music, whether it's in romance writing, it's a really cool stage of life, we'll say.
So, I guess we don't think of, I mean, the Jewish athlete per se as a central figure. He sort of is supposed to take on this, very sexy role, I guess. It's not a traditionally Jewish role in terms of physicality. Was there something appealing about that in terms of framing a Jewish protagonist in that sort of different light, in an athletic light, that was appealing to you, or something you wanted to focus on?
I mean, I think what ended up happening, I think the one time where I really focused on sort of destroying body types and preconceived notions of those body types and what people are supposed to do with them is in a book called Love and Latkes, which is the third book in my Friendships and Festival series. I didn't really think about how revolutionary it was in terms of body types and Jews in terms of stereotypes in hockey, if that makes any sense. I kind of was just like, I do what I usually do, which is I'm just going to shove Jews everywhere. I'm going to shove us everywhere in places where they don't expect us to go. And thankfully, I'm not the only person who does this, but like, that's how I see it. Like, you know, even when the evidence is to the contrary, I'm going to put us in, and we're going to be there and we're going to be proud and celebrated. And maybe some of that is hopeful fantasy. Maybe that is, a reflection of reality, or at least hopefully it will be a reflection of reality at some point in time. If that makes sense.
Well, for sure, this might get a little, we might be getting deep into literary corner and now analyzing here. But you think about, traditional sex appeal of hockey and also with Judaism, and it's much more of a functional behavior, right? Like, the hockey body and the sort of traditional hockey look isn't necessarily the most chiseled Fabio type romance novel guy. It's at least not in my experience, having played hockey and not looking like that. It's functional strength, and it's not necessarily the body that makes hockey players as intriguing as they are. It's the culture and the attitude, which is also very true of Jewish people.
I guess there's a tradition of Jewish sex symbols or Jewish male sex symbols being more cerebral. It's not necessarily physical and stuff like that. There seems to be a reframing of things, and not to say, I mean, your protagonist is not, he's not like he's cast as some himbo per se, like some dummy, but there is an element of the I don't know, the jock archetype that comes through in some of these things that I think is understandable as a more a more classic, but not necessarily classically Jewish object of affection.
Well, it's also like, there thankfully are stories that like I can look to and be like, okay, what happened with this person? Like, what was their life like? What inspires me about writing this kind of story? Like my most popular story, the male protagonist of that story is like like a tall beanpole, like, and who is the most ridiculous human being on earth. I love him to pieces, but he's the most ridiculous human being on earth. He's the hero of Miracle Menorahs, which is my first book. The importance when writing him, I didn't think of him as the most ridiculous human being on earth, but really, I thought of him as the main female character sees him.
Okay.
I thought of him through her eyes. And I think that's the most important part of it. Like, it's not like, covers and all of that kind of stuff aside, the most important thing about writing a character sexy isn't general broad sex appeal when you are writing it. If you do it correctly, the most, and I've said this to friends, like, the most ridiculous human being on the face of the earth can be the most sexy if you see him through him or her, who, whatever their gender identity or presentation might be, if you see them through the eyes of the person who falls in love with them.
Interesting way to put it.
That's the key for romance writing, right? Like, when you are writing those relationships, at least that part of it, if you manage to make that protagonist, that love interest, sexy in the eyes of whoever is falling in love with them, you're golden. Doesn't matter.
That's very powerful, especially for, people who like Jews.
I mean, like,
which is great.
I mean, we are sexy. I mean, of course we are, but like this idea of like, what that preconceived sort of, Christian like notion of what's sexy is sometimes kind of ridiculous.
Stacey, we'll have to let you go, but before we do, I want to ask a question that's timely for this time of the hockey calendar. Are playoff beards sexy?
It depends.
Is it based on whether or not someone can grow a full one? is there a variety that's better or worse? Because some of the guys are very patchy in terms of what they can do.
Yeah, the patchy's not so sexy. Like the beard has to fit the wearer. Like you
Okay.
can't just have ridiculous like you can't. Oh God, brain is not working. He used to play for the Sharks. I think now he plays
Brent
for
Burns.
Carolina.
I know who
Yes,
you're thinking of.
I'm
Yeah.
not. I mean, it's trademark for him. For me, it is not sexy. Like that's not my type. Some people love it. I'm like, great, you know.
Right. Well, I guess we'll have to see if the Rangers
interesting.
can get far enough next year to see if Adam Fox can pull one off.
I was about to say Jack Hughes seems like sort of a goatee. Seems like he can top out at the goatee.
Yeah.
Which is certainly a look. I have one last question for you.
Sure, talk to me.
You know, in the world, you know, we've talked about obviously Jewish hockey romance is your forte. It is the world you're in. Are there any other sports that Jewish romance has developed into such a culture?
Yes.
And what are they? Can you talk about
I want to give a humongous shout out to Katie Casey, whose baseball romances are freaking amazing. I have a love-hate relationship with baseball and have had since the Yankees stadium attached itself to Metro North, and I used to work at Grand Central, but that's another story entirely. But like Katie Casey's baseball romances are freaking amazing. There's also a lot of other hockey writers, Ari Baran in particular, I can think of off the top of my head. There are tons of different authors who've delved and dove into different sports romances, and it's kind of amazing to see.
I mean, we should say Katie Casey. I think some of her work deals with same sex romances between players on the same team, which is pretty pushing the limits on what's I don't know, commonly accepted in professional sports, or at least publicly accepted in professional sports.
Not but not in, and it's wonderful because like one of the things that I love about their writing is the fact that like they're a huge baseball fan, right. And it comes across like the detail, like we didn't go deep into the like specifics about like what like we went into some specifics about the book, but you can kind of tell like I have a little bit of a hockey obsession. And like recognizes like when you're talking about fandom and sports and how fandom makes sports romance better.
Okay, right.
If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think we see it in both Jewish and sports movies, for example, that when the people making those things don't know what they're talking about, it shines through. Like I saw a TikTok of, I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was the one with Jason Bateman and Jane Fonda at a Shiva. And someone was
that one.
The TikTok video pointed out that like there was a tray of Hamantaschen, and like the Shiva, not the Purim party, was taking place in October, and just that like it's very discordant. Like I suppose one can eat a Hamantaschen all times a year. The amount of times I've walked into someone's house in October or for a Shiva, and there's been a tray
I was going to say like for Shiva in particular, like
a tray of Hamantaschen out is pretty limited. And the same way, like in sports movies, like you can usually tell who looks like they've thrown a baseball before, who looks like they've shot a basketball before, and who they cut away from when they're doing it. So I think it really does shine through in your work about the romance, the hockey, and you're able to put that all together into a book.
That means a ton.
It's very true.
Yeah.
I'm about to go sideways for a second, but that's the same reason I never liked Mrs. Maisel.
God!
In like the second episode, she goes to Zabar's and gets some pork chops. What Jewish person has ever eaten a pork chop in their life?
Does Zabar's even have them? But also, fun wild story.
Exactly.
Fun wild story about that. So the show premiered the day after my birthday, or it was supposed to premiere the day of my birthday, I think. Memory serves. And then I read an interview with the lead actress talking about how she has Jewish friends. I'm like, nope, that's it. I'm done.
Yeah,
not happening.
It.
Yeah.
I think I really remember Emily Nussbaum, who's actually been on a CJN podcast before. She called it actively anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I was like, I have too much to watch, too much to do.
We're sideways here. We're off the point.
Yeah, but Stacey, before you go, is there anything to plug where people can find your books, where they can get the Name It's a Mistake?
Hit us with your pluggables
when it comes out.
So B'nai Mitzvah Mistake comes out on June 1st. It will be available from Thule Publishing or anywhere books are sold. You can find me at staceyagdern.com or S. Agdern on Instagram or TikTok, NYStacey on Twitter, or Stacey A. Agdern on Facebook.
Fabulous.
Thanks so much for joining us, Stacey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, big thanks to Stacey for what was a really fun and interesting interview. I don't know if this is the right time to ask it, Jamie, but what do you think the horniest professional sport is?
Oh, great question. It's got to be something with some physicality. No disrespect to baseball, curling.
My initial reaction is Aussie rules football.
Oh,
it's got
okay.
The short shorts and the long and lean men.
Look, I think any way you slice it, okay, maybe horny is the wrong word, but the most romantic has to be figure skating.
Yes.
I mean, it is, paired. It is the only sport where there's multiple competitors. That is like a pair, a couple, not even necessarily opposite gender anymore, as same-sex figure skating is in its infancy, but coming together. But it is, it's called ice dance. Like there's a romance to it. I don't know if that makes it the horniest, though.
It is definitely not the nudist. There are much nuder sports, generally speaking.
No, the nudist has got to be like water polo, beach volleyball.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things.
There's an inherent horniness to that.
There is, but it's also like, I don't know, in the water, in the sand. I don't think it necessarily like creates a sexy environment per se. So I don't know. I don't know what ultimately gets to be the horniest. I
actually think that
depends. You know what? Like we talked about, there's all kinds of different niches and specifications, and people have their own likes and dislikes. And as Stacey talked about, it's okay to be basically horny for hockey players, horny for baseball players, if that's what you're interested in. That's what all these novels are, getting to a certain degree. Not that romance is exclusively about horniness. I understand that.
No, it's not. It's about a lot. But I felt it was apropos. Although I do want to point out the inescapable Jewishness of your answer on beach volleyball not being sexy because there's too much sand. The sand's just gonna get. I don't like the sand. Too much.
All right, I think that's a good place to leave it. Until next time, as always, we are brought to you by the Canadian Jewish News. You can find all Canadian Jewish news content, including this podcast, if you want to get it straight from the source.
Bring it back over and over and over again. Just get into an infinity loop of being referred to the podcast by this podcast itself.
Yeah, you can find that at thecjn.ca. We're produced, as always, by Michael Freeman, who for some reason continues to put up with us. And you can reach out to us and talk to us on Twitter at Menschwarmers, where we are still around occasionally. I mean, definitely less on Twitter than I used to be. It's gotten pretty bad, but I'm still there until...
Have you noticed an Elon difference?
Yeah, the product is definitely worse, and also just like I don't experience it that much, but like there's definitely more hate speech on there. So I don't think Ubersturmfuhrer Musk is going to be reining that in at any point in the future. So we're still on Twitter at Menschwarmers if you want to reach out to us there. Like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Download a podcast app on your phone, subscribe to it. Menschwarmers can come right to you automatically every time we publish. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
See you soon.